about dislocation. We talked about fractures earlier. So a dislocation is when a bone gets moved out of its normal position in the joint. So we know that joints are a place where two bones meet, where there's some movement allowed. They're held together with ligaments, and the bones fit together in certain ways to make a hinge joint or ball and socket joint. But there are times when a force may bring that bone out of alignment, take that bone out of its normal position, and that's what dislocation is. So in this x-ray that you see here, raise your hand if you could tell me what bone do you think, or what joint I should say, has been dislocated? Bell?
The arm.
Yeah, where in there?
Elbow.
Yeah, that's an elbow. So we have up here, raise your hand, tell me what bone? Raise your hand, raise your hand. Trevor?
Humerus.
Humerus. And then we have the ulnar radius here. You could see where the base of the humerus should fit into this concave area in the radius, but obviously it's not in place. Okay? It's out of place, it's dislocated. And so a person wouldn't be able to bend their arm properly. Probably they would be in some fair amount of pain. And so there could be some damage to the ligaments that keep everything together. In order to get that out of place, there's going to be some stretching or maybe some tearing of the ligaments as well. So, you know, the treatment for something like this is pretty basic. They get the bone back into place. And basically the doctor, if you went to the doctor and your elbow is dislocated, you went in, they basically grab your lower arm, grab your upper arm, sort of pull them apart to get that bone out and get it back into place in the humerus there. And I think I've never had a dislocated joint, but from what I've heard is people say when it's dislocated, it's very, very painful. But once the doctor does, and when they get it in place, it's very painful. But once it's back, it's like a big relief once it's back in position. It feels a lot better. And when you do that, you know, it may lead to being more susceptible to a dislocation in the future because, again, when that bone comes out of position, there's probably some stretching of the surrounding ligaments. So therefore, that joint it's not held in as tightly anymore, and you may be more likely to do it. You know, shoulders are common dislocation as well, especially in sports like football, because when you tackle somebody, if you get that impact mostly on like your upper arm and not sort of throughout your chest, then you could get that bone can get knocked sort of back and out of socket.
But it usually goes right back.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't remember how old I was, and I completely forgot like exactly what injury I had. But I played quarterback, and I was going to throw the ball, and I got stuffed, and I was still moving forward, and my shoulder went forward, my arm stood.
Yeah. And did you dislocate it?
I had no idea. I don't remember.
Could be. Syndrome?
Last year I dislocated my hand with my jaw.
Your jaw?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
What? Yeah.
All right. Now I know some of you don't like the kind of gory pictures, so the next one is a little bit. So if you don't like the look, you don't have to look for a minute. So this one is a person who has dislocated their ankle. So if you look, you see this is the front of their shin. Obviously their foot sort of should be pointing straight down, but it's dislocated at the ankle. Yes, and it's off to the side. So this whole area here should be down here. And this x-ray, what you also can see, is when that dislocation, this is from a softball game, like maybe the person sliding into home or something, catching their ankle on the plate and sort of jamming their foot out of dislocating their ankle. But anyway, when that dislocation did happen, the ligament tore off a small sliver of bone that you see, the sliver of bone on the x-ray. It's called an avulsion, where it sort of tore off a little piece of bone because of the trauma of that injury. Yes, the glass.
There's something.
All right, it's gone.
Muscles.
Muscles.
Yeah, there's two bumps there. One on one side, one on the other. Maybe more pronounced. All right, so let's move on. So that's sort of, they're very related, and there's a lot of overlap, but we'll say that's the end of the skeletal system. And now we'll start to talk about the muscular system. So I know you guys have studied this, most of you in health. 3 types of muscle. What's one? Corbin?
Cardiac.
Cardiac,
Smooth.
smooth, and skeletal muscle are the 3 types of muscle. Skeletal muscle is the one that attaches to our bones and allows us to move various parts of our body. And these muscles are under our conscious control. So we call that what? Control.
Voluntary.
Voluntary. These are voluntary muscles.
Yeah.
Okay. So these include most of the muscles that are attached to the skeleton and allow all the various movement that you do consciously. The second type is cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is found in only one location, the heart. Okay? Think of cardiologist or cardiac arrest. So cardiac means heart. So cardiac muscle is the muscle that makes up our heart. And obviously our heart muscle has to be very strong. Has to have constant endurance because it's constantly beating. And so this cardiac muscle is found in our heart. And again, it's obviously involuntary muscle. You don't tell your heart to beat every second or so. It just happens on its own.
Doesn't it look like a chicken?
Chicken. Yes. Very delicious.
All right. And number 3, the last type, smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found throughout many internal organs like the stomach, the small intestine, arteries, okay, the uterus. These are made of smooth muscle. And again, smooth muscle is also involuntary. You don't consciously sort of move food through your stomach and mix it. I'm going to mix this around a little bit. I'm going to move this food through my small intestine, squeeze it down a little bit. It doesn't work that way. Those muscles, they work on their own.
It works the same coming back up like a frog.
All right. So if you look at the various muscles, do you guys know the other word for skeletal muscle you probably learned in health?
Straight.
Well, striated. It is stripes. That's what striated means. Cardiac muscle is also striated. Smooth muscle is not. Now, if we think about how our muscles work, most of our muscle tissue is tissue that can contract. What does the word contract mean?
Like move, it can like
Make smaller.
Yeah, it means will. It means make smaller. It's the opposite of expand is contract. So muscles can shorten or they can relax. That's all they can do there. So many of our muscles to move our limbs work in pairs called flexors and extensors. Okay? Because muscles only can pull, they cannot push. So they're mostly in pairs. And if you think about your elbow, just easy to illustrate. If you have your arm straight out and your elbow is straight, you have 2 muscles that control the bending at your elbow. It's your bicep muscle on the top of your humerus, or there's the tricep muscles on the bottom. And so when your arm is straight out, your bicep muscle sort of relaxed. It's lengthened. It's pretty long. For you to bend at the elbow, bring your hand up towards your face, you can feel the muscle. What happens is your bicep muscle starts to shorten. It contracts. It's getting smaller, and it's attached to the bones in your forearm by tendons. So as it gets shorter, it's pulling on these bones in your forearm, causing your arm to curl up.
What, you mean a triceps?
No, so in this position, even just your arm bent, in this position, your bicep is contracted, it's short, but it can't then lengthen and push your hand back down. Instead, your tricep muscle, which in this position, your tricep is relaxed and it's extended. To pull your arm back down, your tricep contracts and you can feel it. It gets smaller. It's pulling on the bones here in your elbow and it brings those forearms down back into the straight position. So these muscles work in conjunction. Bicep pulls it up, the tricep pulls it back down. But there's no pushing involved. No, triceps the back of your arm. Same thing with your quadricep muscle and your hamstring. They both, one bends your foot back and one straightens it. Their muscles, they work in pairs. And as you know, by exercise, when we exercise, whether it's running or lifting weights or doing push-ups or whatever, the more you use muscles, the more stress and the bigger the load that you put on those muscles, they adapt to that. Okay? By doing push-ups, for example, you're stressing your pectoral and deltoid muscles, and when they recover, when they sort of heal, they heal but slightly stronger than they were before to deal with this increased stress that you're putting on them. And you repeat this process, day after day, week after week. Gradually those muscles become stronger and stronger because they're adapting these constant stresses that you're putting on them, and you become stronger and your muscles become larger. Okay? So the size of muscles increases when you exercise. Bigger muscles are stronger muscles. And some people can take this to the extreme, like Mr. Arcuri when he used to work out.
That's my new favorite picture.
Obviously, he hasn't been working out for a long time now, if you've seen him.
Wait, does that say number 12?
That's his arms. Yeah, he has his last competition. Okay.
Well,
Mr. Arcuri.
It's so terrible.
But yeah, no, it's just that the skin tones don't match because one time he got the spray tan in his eyes and it stung really bad. So from there on out, he would cover his face with a towel when he went for the spray tan. So his face is a little paler than the rest of his body. That's why he doesn't quite match.
I want to look away.
All right. So let's talk about tendons and ligaments. Again, these are sort of linked with literally the skeletal system. And these are what we call connective tissue. They connect various parts of the body. So tendons, they connect bones to muscle. Okay. So the muscle, when you look at the way the muscle is structured, the muscular part that contracts is here shown in red. But that muscle basically turns into a tendon where it attaches to the bone. And you can feel these. If you sort of half bend your arm and you feel inside of your elbow, this hard, that's not a bone. I know it feels strong and very tough. That's a tendon. That's connecting your bicep muscle to the bones in your forearm. Yeah, this thing you feel. If you feel, in the back of your knee, those two on each side, those two sort of cords, it feels like, those are tendons. They attach your hamstring muscles to the bones, to the tibia and fibula. No, and so the muscle turns into that tendon. They pull on the tendon, which actually moves those. If you feel your Achilles tendon in the back of your heel, again, it feels like bone, but it's not bone. It's hard, very tough, very durable connective tissue. That's just another tendon. Okay, so they attach those muscles. Is this the picture? This would be a little gory one. Or no? Oh, so this is the Achilles tendon. You can see the calf muscle attaches to that heel bone using this Achilles tendon. Now I think there's a picture here. If you don't like the gory stuff, you might want to look away. But what you see here, so here you see a doctor doing a surgery. You can see this is a person's foot. This is the back of their heel. Their toes down here. The doctor, guys, the doctor made an incision through the back of the bottom of their foot. And what the doctor's actually holding on to is the Achilles tendon. So that's not a bone that's holding on the Achilles tendon. What they're probably doing is reattaching this Achilles tendon to the heel. It could have been, guys, it could have been detached due to an injury, and so doctors doing surgery to reattach that Achilles tendon. All right, it's gone now. So to sort of get it out and get it back to the heel where it needs to reattach. All right, one at a time. What?
Feels a wide away.
Trevor. What? Yeah, that's tendon. You can feel tendons all in your hands. You can see where they come down in front of each finger. They move all your fingers. I'll show you another video in a minute.
This is the tendon.
No? No? There's lots of things. There's like tendonitis. We'll learn about this in a minute. Tendonitis is inflammation in the tendon. And, you know, it depends for various reasons. They just hurt. Sometimes they get inflamed or sore or maybe rubbing on something. Inflamed, like swollen.
Oh, I never know.
And it just can become sore. It can be ruptured, it can be torn or strained as well.
It just always happens just with this tendon. It just
Yeah, sometimes people.
hurts all the time when I wake up in the morning. Sometimes I like can barely walk.
Yeah, and sometimes it's because of you may be growing at the time, and as you grow, different there may be strains on different tendons or things like that. Those are common, sort of, especially as people are growing. Liam,
How do tendons stick to bone?
they basically attach to that bone. They sort of grow into it. All right, ligaments, however, so ligaments connect bones to bone. So like our joints are bound together with these ligaments. So the tendons, and we have ligaments. So for example, this shows a bunch of ligaments in your hands. Your hands are full of them. Like your knuckles are joints, and they're all sort of wrapped together with these ligaments that stabilize the joints. And you know, if you look, this is a hand. I mean, I think sometimes people don't realize it, but this part of your hand or your palm, or the back of your palm, is there a bone, a square bone here?
No.
No, it's these, your finger bones extend. There's one more joint below that goes from your bottom knuckle here all the way down to your wrist. And you can feel like in between, if you sort of feel in between, it's sort of soft in between each of those bones, because you could see here in this picture, there's space there. There's muscle in there, and skin, and fat, and various tissues, but basically, there's space there between each of them. Now these parts of your hand, they're all sort of bound one to the other, side to side, by these ligaments, so that your fingers don't spread apart too much. But those are those ligaments that hold your hand sort of all together. And you can feel them here. When you hold your hand up, sort of you can see these little sort of cords that they connect your fingers, bones, to the muscles, and as you move your fingers, they're connected to muscles which are pulling on them.
So are there like tiny little muscles in there?
Yeah, there's very small muscles which allow for that fine manipulation of your wrists and of your fingers. This next video, again, you may not want to look, but shows the interior tendons actually in motion.
I saw that. That's so cool.
So here you go.
Oh my god!
You can see those are the tendons. You can see them
Wait, is
sort of
that guy's
pulling
hand
back.
open?
Yeah, you can see them pulling back and forth.
Also,
I don't exactly know the story behind the video. Yeah? Yeah, that's part of your... Alright, guys. Nate, turn around. Corbin. A cyst is like yeah, it's just like a swollen area that could be usually filled with just fluid. It's just like a bump that's usually filled with fluid. They may drain it. Yeah, you could drain a cyst. Just with it, no, they put a needle in there and just suck the fluid out. All right, now ligaments and tendons can be damaged, just like bone can. So some examples of a sprain. When we talk about spraining something, we're talking about damage to a ligament. You sprain a joint, okay? And so an ankle sprain, which is a common one. If you roll your ankle, you sprain your ankle. Basically, you stepped on it in a way, or you put some force on it that stretch those ligaments that hold your ankle joint together, stretch them beyond their normal range of motion, and different things. They can just sort of get stretched and kind of be painful for a while, but not really damage too much. They could be sort of torn a little bit, some tears in there, which is like a little bit worse of a sprain, which is more painful, and you may not be able to walk on it, or they could tear completely, and that's like a really bad sprain. And it's just a matter of how much pressure was put on that joint when you sprained it. And you can see here you have a torn ligament here in the ankle, and when that happens, it leads to that damage leads to a fair amount of swelling. So when you sprain a joint, then body fluid, blood collects in there. They may be bleeding in the area, and then they bruise afterwards. Like if you ever sprain something, you end up with a big bruise. That's because of bleeding underneath the skin and in that tissue. It swells up, it hurts, and so forth. So what's like the usual treatment if you've ever sprained anything? There's a word for it.
Sprain.
RICE. RICE stands for 4 things.
It's like rest,
Rest,
ice,
ice,
compress,
compression,
and elevate.
and elevation. So you rest, so you stay off the joint for a little while. Ice, you ice it, which reduces swelling. Compression, you wrap it like with a bandage, an ACE bandage, that reduces swelling. And elevate it, again, so it swells less. And that leads to quicker recovery, less pain, more mobility, and so forth. Again, there's sometimes some bruising associated with it. And always usually some swelling. So you can see this ankle here of this person is swelling up pretty extensively.
Before I sprained my arm,
Not
there was
really.
no swelling.
All right, tendons, however, so those are ligaments. Sprains are ligament damage. Damage to muscles and tendons are usually called strains. So a strain is a tear, a partial tear in the tendon. Here you can see a person has ruptured their Achilles tendon. Achilles tendon, named after? Oh, we talked about this, didn't we?
Not Achilles.
All right. So again, a rupture in the Achilles tendon, guys. All right. Would it need to be repaired? It's a fairly common though sports injury. Tendonitis, you probably have heard of. Tendonitis is when the tendon area becomes inflamed and swollen, and it's painful when you're using that muscle. Yeah, it happens in different parts depending on what sports or activities you do. It may happen if you play an instrument a lot and you use certain joints a lot and certain muscles, they can start to get inflamed, or depends on the sport and so forth. Trigger finger is when the tendons in a finger basically lock and are very difficult to sort of open up, and you may have to open it up manually. Sometimes the tendons, which are usually enclosed in this sheathing tissue, can come out, and that leads to some pain, especially in golfers and tennis players, where you put a lot of rotational motion on where those joints connect. Is often sometimes called tennis elbow or golfer's elbow. All right, any questions about